We all know the classic 60s sci-fi series Lost in Space. It was wholesome, campy, and full of robot warnings. But for a brief moment, it was something else entirely. It was terrifying. On 3 separate occasions, the show's writers pushed the boundaries of what was acceptable, crafting episodes so dark and disturbing that they were immediately removed from the lineup. They were hidden from the public, locked away for decades. Why? What could possibly have been so shocking that a family show had to bury it forever? The answer reveals a secret, terrifying history of the series you never knew. We think of Lost in Space as harmless 60s fun, but by 1968, the show had become something else entirely. It had become a punchline. The episode that sealed its fate featured a villain so absurd, so laughable, that the cast couldn't even film it without breaking character. The director was furious. The studio was horrified, and when it aired, viewers didn't know whether to laugh or cry. But the real tragedy wasn't the talking carrot. It was what that carrot represented. By the 3rd season of Lost in Space, something had gone terribly wrong. The show that began as a serious sci-fi adventure about a family lost among the stars had devolved into campy, childish comedy. Dr. Smith, once a menacing villain, was now a bumbling fool. The robot was his comic sidekick. The Robinsons were almost an afterthought. Ratings were falling. The writers were running out of ideas. And then came the episode that would become the most infamous in television history. The Great Vegetable Rebellion was the show's penultimate episode. It aired on February 28, 1968. The plot was simple. Dr. Smith lands on a planet where plants are the highest form of intelligence. The leader of this world is Tybo, a giant talking carrot. Tybo captures the Robinsons because they have been cutting down plants. He plans to turn them into trees. Yes, trees. The cast knew they were in trouble the moment they read the script. Stanley Adams, who played Tybo, had to wear a giant carrot costume. The actor playing the purple-headed helper had to nibble on Dr. Smith, who had been turned into a human stalk of celery. It was absurd. It was embarrassing. And the cast couldn't keep straight faces during filming. Multiple expensive retakes were necessary because everyone kept laughing. The director was furious. The studio was horrified. But the show went on. When the episode finally aired, the reaction was swift and brutal. Viewers were confused. Critics were merciless. This wasn't science fiction. It was a joke. And it wasn't funny. But The Great Vegetable Rebellion wasn't just a bad episode. It was a symbol. It represented everything that had gone wrong with the show. The serious space adventure of Season 1 had been replaced by ridiculous plots and cheap laughs. The producers had stopped trying, and the audience knew it. The episode is often called the worst thing Irwin Allen ever produced. It has an IMDb rating of just 4.9 out of 10. Even the cast members trash it in interviews. But here's the thing. It wasn't just one bad script. It was a result of a slow, painful decline that had been happening for years. And it all started when the show lost its way. But the Talking Carrot wasn't the only banned episode. There were 2 others, each disturbing in its own way. And they reveal a darker truth about Lost in Space that the studio desperately wanted to hide. What were they? And why did they scare the network so much? The Talking Carrot was a comedy. But the episode that came before it was something far more unsettling. It began with Fog-Shrouded Planet, a mysterious female voice, and a family being lured into a trap. What they found wasn't a campy villain. It was an entire world of soulless cyborgs, a giant brain that demanded obedience, and a horrifying question. What if their own robot turned against them? This wasn't silly. It was chilling, and it almost didn't air. Season 2 of Lost in Space opened with a promise. The show was trying to find its way back to the serious science fiction of the first season, and for a moment it succeeded. Episode 3, The Ghost Planet, aired on September 28, 1966. It was a dark, atmospheric story that felt more like a horror film than a family adventure. The plot was simple but effective. The Jupiter 2 lands on a planet that Dr. Smith, in his endless delusion, believes is Earth. He's lured out by a female voice promising a golden treasure. But the welcoming party isn't human. It's a gang of cyborgs, robotic beings with hollow, metallic voices. They capture Smith, and soon, Will and the robot are taken to planet's ruler, a giant, pulsating cybernetic brain. What makes this episode genuinely unsettling isn't the special effects. It's the atmosphere. The planet is shrouded in constant fog. Eerie statues, or perhaps corpses, lurk in the background. The cyborgs move with stiff, unnatural grace. And then there's a female robot who speaks in a voice that is both charming and deeply menacing. When she laughs at Smith, you feel it in your bones. The true horror, however, comes from the betrayal. The planet's brain orders a robot to swear allegiance to it, and the robot, our beloved loyal robot, seemingly agrees. He becomes an officer of the cyborg army. He threatens Dr. Smith with electric bolts if he doesn't work faster. For a few terrifying minutes, the robot is the enemy. The family's greatest protector has turned against them. It's a moment that taps into a primal fear. The fear of being betrayed by something you trust. The fear of a machine that was supposed to save you becoming your jailer. The episode plays on this brilliantly, building suspense until the very end. The resolution, of course, is that the robot was a double agent all along. He was playing the brain to save his friends. But the damage was done. The image of the robot as a traitor lingered. It was too dark for a show aimed at children. And then there was the missile. After escaping, the family finds that the planet has launched a homing missile after them. They can't outrun it. They can't shake it. Their only hope is to crash it into a nearby planet, pulling away at the very last second. It's a sequence of genuine suspense, a reminder that space is dangerous and death is always one miscalculation away. The Ghost Planet was a return to form. It was serious. It was suspenseful. And it was banned. Well, not exactly banned, but it was shelved. The studio felt it was too frightening for its young audience. They worried it would give children nightmares. And so, for a time, it disappeared. It was a sign that the show was caught in a tug-of-war. Half the writers wanted serious sci-fi. The other half wanted silly comedy. And the studio wanted ratings. But The Ghost Planet wasn't the only episode that tested the limits. There was one more. One that went even further. One that didn't just scare children. It disturbed adults. The talking carrot was a joke. The cyborg planet was a nightmare. But the third banned episode wasn't funny. It wasn't even scary in a fun way. It was deeply, profoundly disturbing. It showed a man losing his mind, trapped in a prison of his own fear. The network took one look and said absolutely not. They couldn't air it. Not because it was bad, but because it was too real. It showed something that no children's show should ever show, a soul-breaking. By the third season, Lost in Space had become a comedy, but tucked away in that season was an episode called The Thaw. It was unlike anything else the show ever produced. It was a psychological horror story set entirely inside the mind of a dying man. The plot followed the Robinsons arriving on a frozen planet. They find a man in suspended animation, his body cryogenically preserved. But his mind is still active, trapped in a nightmare world of his own creation. To save him, Will and the robot must enter his mind. What they find is a carnival of terror, ruled by an entity called fear. The episode is terrifying not because of monsters or aliens, but because of what it says about the human condition. The man was afraid to die, so he froze his body to wait for a cure. But the cure never came. Instead, his fear grew. It consumed him. It built an entire world around him, a prison made of his own terror. And by the time the Robinsons arrive, the man is no longer in control. Fear is. The entity called fear isn't a monster. It's a manifestation of the man's own psyche. It taunts, it manipulates, it feeds on panic. It's a dark mirror of what happens when we let our anxieties rule us. The episode is a quiet, unsettling meditation on mortality, loneliness, and fragility of the human mind. The studio executives were horrified. This wasn't the light-hearted adventure they were selling. This was a horror film. It was too cerebral, too dark, too adult. It was the kind of episode that would give children nightmares for weeks, but not because of a scary robot, because it was about something real, about the fear of death, about the fear of losing yourself. So they banned it. They shelved it. They pretended it didn't exist. For decades, The Thaw was nearly impossible to find. It was a secret the show buried, a reminder of a brief moment when Lost in Space dared to be something more than a silly comedy. But the story doesn't end there. The three banned episodes reveal a hidden history of the show, a history of a series that didn't know what it wanted to be, a history of writers pushing boundaries, only to be silenced, a history of a studio that chose safety over art, and in the end, that choice sealed the show's fate. Why did Lost in Space really get canceled? Was it the low ratings? The bad scripts? Or was it something deeper, something the studio never wanted to admit? So the studio banned these episodes. They locked them away. But here's the strange part. They never explained why. No press release. No angry statement. Just silence. As if the episodes had never existed. As if they wanted everyone to forget. But why? What were they so afraid of? The answer is more complicated than you think. And it reveals a secret about the show that nobody talks about. A secret that explains everything. The three banned episodes were all removed for different reasons. The Great Vegetable Rebellion was pulled because it was too embarrassing. The studio didn't want people to see their once respected show turned into a joke. The Ghost Planet was shelved because it was too frightening for children. The image of the robot turning against the family was simply too dark. And the Thaw? That was pulled because it was too disturbing for adults. A psychological horror about a man losing his mind was not what CBS had signed up for. But the real mystery isn't why they were banned. It's why the studio never admitted it. They never said, "We made a mistake. These episodes are too dark." They never said, "We're pulling these to protect our audience." They just quietly removed them from the lineup. They pretended they had never existed. And for decades, fans had no idea they were even missing. It wasn't until the 1990s, when the episodes were finally released on home video, that the truth came out. Fans who had grown up watching Lost in Space were shocked. They had never seen these episodes before. They had never even heard of them. The studio had done such a good job of burying them that an entire generation had grown up without knowing they existed. Why the secrecy? The answer may lie in the show's identity crisis. Lost in Space was always caught between two worlds. The first season was a serious, black-and-white sci-fi drama about a family trying to survive in space. It was dark. It was suspenseful. It was a show Owen Allen originally wanted to make. But then the ratings started dropping, and the studio panicked. They decided to make the show lighter, more comedic, more campy. Dr. Smith became a buffoon. The robot became his sidekick. The Robinsons became secondary characters. And the show became a parody of itself. The audience changed from adults to children, and the show's identity was lost forever. The three banned episodes were caught in the middle of this transformation. The Ghost Planet was a serious sci-fi episode from Season 2. The Thaw was a psychological thriller from Season 3. And The Great Vegetable Rebellion was the final, desperate attempt at comedy. They represented everything the show had been and everything it had become. And the studio wanted to forget all of it. But there's another reason they stayed silent. A reason that goes deeper than ratings and identity. A reason that involves the show's very soul. What was Lost in Space really about? Was it about family? Adventure? Or was it about something else entirely? The Carrot Man was forgotten. The cyborg planet was locked away. The horror of the frozen mind was erased from memory. But the show lived on. It became a cult classic. It inspired movies, reboots, and generations of fans. And yet, the three banned episodes remained a secret, a ghost lurking in the show's history. What did they mean? Why did they matter? And what can they teach us about the show, about television, and about ourselves? The cancellation of Lost in Space in 1968 wasn't caused by a talking carrot. It was caused by something far more mundane: money. 20th Century Fox had taken financial hits and needed to make cutbacks. The show was expensive to produce. The ratings were slipping, and the network decided it was time to move on. The final episode aired on March 6, 1968, and the Robinsons were left floating in space, their fate unknown. But the show refused to die. It found a second life in syndication. Children who had grown up watching the campy adventures of Dr. Smith and the robot introduced it to their own kids. It became a nostalgia trip, a reminder of a simpler time. It inspired a feature film in 1998, a critically acclaimed Netflix reboot in 2018, and countless references in pop culture. And yet, The three banned episodes remained hidden. For decades, fans who had watched the show religiously didn't even know they existed. It wasn't until the 1990s, when the episodes were finally released on home video, that the truth came out. When fans finally saw The Ghost Planet, they were shocked. This wasn't the silly, campy show they remembered. This was a genuine sci-fi thriller, complete with giant brain, an army of cyborgs, and a terrifying turn by the robot. It was dark. It was suspenseful. It was everything the show had been in its first season. When they saw the thaw, they were disturbed. This was a psychological horror story about a man trapped in his own mind, consumed by fear. It was the kind of episode that could have won awards if it had been produced by a more serious network. And when they saw The Great Vegetable Rebellion, they laughed. But it was a different kind of laugh. It was a laugh of recognition. This was the show they remembered. The show that had lost its way. The show that had become a parody of itself. The 3 episodes told a story. A story of a show that couldn't decide what it wanted to be. A story of writers pushing boundaries, only to be silenced. A story of a studio that chose safety over art. A story of a show that died because it lost its soul. Today, Lost in Space is remembered as a beloved cult classic, but it could have been so much more. It could have been a serious sci-fi drama. It could have been a psychological thriller. It could have been a show that challenged audiences, that made them think, that pushed the boundaries of what television could do. Instead, it became a joke. And the 3 banned episodes are a testament to what was lost. The lesson? Television is a medium of compromise. Art and commerce are always at war. And sometimes the art loses. But the stories that were buried, the episodes that were banned, they don't stay buried forever. They wait. They bide their time. And eventually they emerge. They remind us of what was possible. They remind us of what was lost. And they remind us that even in the silliest of shows, there's always something deeper waiting to be discovered.